And welcome back to episode 3 of Void Talk. I'm your host, Rain, and yeah, this is the show where I work through my depressive episodes and doom scroll and explain my rambling thought process on the issues of the day. Now, hopefully, I'll get an episode that's not about politics out at some point. But today is definitely about politics. I guess I should start by updating on my personal situation. It's only bad news, so I don't really want to think about it. Just a lot of bad news, bad things, bad events. And yeah, so we're just gonna pretend like that's not happening and talk about well, we do have an election to watch tonight. We're gonna live watch. It's not a particularly big one. It's just a primary in the U.S. The June 4th primaries. Let me get you display. We're gonna be here on. We're gonna be seeing Bolts a lot. If you don't know what Bolts is, boltsmag.org is a fantastic website for American politics. They cover all levels of politics, including local, and have these wonderful election trackers for election nights. Everything from ballot measures to state legislative races. These are not these are state legislature primaries. And then there's the U.S. House. Because when we talk about politics, we usually talk a lot about in the U.S. We usually talk about the president and maybe the Senate and the House. But the state Supreme Courts, county offices, state ballot measures, municipal offices, these things all matter quite a bit. In fact, I would argue these matter more because these are the places where policy actually gets implemented on a local level. Oop, I clicked something. We're also going to talk about some of the other elections that have happened in the meantime. I know, again, train of thought and all that, but I did say I didn't want to do these every 2 weeks, but I guess that's just what we're doing now because I'm sad all the time. Can't have motivation to do things, which is fun. I did, I guess, make some progress on my book. I did start it, but that progress has stalled again. So for various reasons. So hopefully I can get back to that at some point. I'd really like to make a big push on it, but it's not like I have much else to do these days other than not get any feedback for jobs. But and aside from not getting a job, which is sure just going to probably be my life from now on, but whatever. Let's talk about so we have I think we have some results for this. We should bring this over here. We do have some results. Let's go to key races because we have to use we don't get any nice things from the country on elections. We just get we have to rely on newspapers. So yeah, obviously the presidential primaries are going to be unsurprising. I guess none of these are swing states, so how Trump performs doesn't really tell us a lot. Like obviously in New Mexico, a blue state, he's going to lose a lot to Haley protest votes, right? And obviously not a lot of votes are in. We're still pretty early in the night. It's only about 9 o'clock. So I'm not going to read too much of this. I guess we have the DC votes. A lot of write-ins, obviously. That's unsurprising. Protest votes. That is what I'm interested in seeing from the Biden primaries is how many protest votes, how many uncommitteds. U.S. Senate Andy Kim was predicted to win his candidacy. I don't think he's the best candidate. I think I don't remember. I haven't done enough research to remember who's who, but I believe one of these is a better has a better record. But Kim's campaign uprooted a big issue. He fought against. There is this weird. I don't remember exactly how it worked, but in New Jersey they had this weird, like ballot thing where like ballots were organized in this really confusing way so as to benefit incumbent candidates, basically allowing the state party to have a lot of influence on who wins the primaries. It was this weird like constituent system. I don't know exactly how it worked, but either way, it basically allowed the Democratic Party machine in New Jersey to entrench ridiculous amounts of corruption, which is why the current why Bob Menendez is not on this list, the current senator from New Jersey, because he was indicted on corruption charges. So yeah, it was really good. This opened up the primary ballots across New Jersey for Democrats, not for Republicans. Republicans didn't have to change, but the Democrats got a court order to change. The Republicans still use the old system, but Democrats are now able to actually like run in elections and not have to just be like party insiders, which is really good for fighting corruption in a when you have only one party in power, right, in a state, a deep blue state or a deep red state, those state parties tend to get very entrenched and very, very corrupt very quickly. So having ways to uproot that is really important. You see this in places like Florida, California, New York, right? This is why we complain a lot about those states. Go back. Menendez did win his son. This is his son. So people were wondering that if he would win, because if his son, if Bob Menendez this is his son, Rob would win his primary. I think this was a very competitive primary, but I guess not. I don't know too much about each one of these races. We can go to Bolts, who will tell us about these races, which is very nice. Conaway. So Conaway was the guy with the ballot advantage, right? The ballot design advantage. He was the one who the local party wanted. And despite the change in the ballot, he still managed to win. So obviously the party machine is not exactly defeated. It looks like, in fact, the party machine has done fairly well despite its setbacks. Obviously, New Jersey elections are the ones we're going to get first. They're the East Coast. For me, it's 9 o'clock in the Midwest. So. Yeah, so I guess we can talk about some of the international elections, and also about why it's important, because I know a lot of Americans don't really care and don't get why we should particularly care, and I want to explain that because I think it's really really important, and why because democracy, we've thought of it, recently. Everyone who grew up in the post-Cold War world lived in a world where American style liberal democracy was the norm. Where every country is a democracy. But historically, if you know any history, right, you know that this was not the case, right? that this is a very odd time in history where there's so many democracies. Well, there was an odd time in history. In fact, today there are substantially more authoritarian governments than democratic governments. That was only a brief period where there was more democracies, and in the post-Cold War world. And so we all sort of have this like, well, it's never going to change, right? Because that's just how it's always been. For me, I've never not lived in a democracy. So there's it's hard to imagine. But the US is in bad shape. I think any American knows that. Our democracy is very, very unhealthy. And frankly, even if Biden wins, there's a good shot democracy dies anyway. If the Republicans win the Senate, they can just stonewall everything, put in as many, judges as they want, because the Democrats will just let them, and then they can rule by judge. They have the Supreme Court, right? So they can just do whatever they want with that. They can use the Supreme Court to legislate, and the Supreme Court has been happy to legislate. You've got, I can go list off all the problems with American democracy, but my point is that American democracy is not doing hot. It's not so good. And one of the reasons why democracy has been such a was briefly the most dominant system of government is because the biggest country in the world, America, everybody knows about America. Everybody, this is something I think that Americans fearing of being America-centric sometimes forget, is just how influential America is, not just by our military or by our economic forces, but just like the idea of America is very influential around the globe. Across the world, you see politicians literally explicitly comparing themselves to American politicians. There's leftists who say, I'm the Bernie Sanders of this country, or right-wing politicians say, I love Donald Trump, I want to be just like him, or or someone saying, I am the moderate, sensible one, I'm just like Joe Biden, right? And they try to attach themselves to American politics. They change their politics and policies and opinions based on American policies. If the politician they want to be like endorses certain policies, then they'll endorse certain policies. And you've seen this all across the world. Russia is a great example, because for all the talk of Russia, the way Russians talk about themselves is not like the Soviet way the Soviets talked about themselves. The way Russians talk about themselves, especially right-wing Russian nationalists, is the same way American boomers talk about. They talk about, the same stuff as American boomers, right? They're heavily inspired by anti-communist American propaganda, more so than anything from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union to them is more of an aesthetic. This idea that Russia once ruled this great empire. They don't really care about any of the like actual. It's a left wing aesthetic with with far right ethics, as I've heard it described. And those far right ethics come from the US. They're often talking points straight out of like American boomer conspiracies. Now, obviously, there's plenty of distinctly Russian conspiracy theories and distinctly Russian culture mixed in, but the fact that they take inspiration from America shows you just how universal American influence is. And when America stops being a democracy, and there's a good shot it will, what will happen around the world? There will be no more torchbearer for democracy. And that's a scary thing, because then where does democracy go if there's no torchbearer? The lights, the big bright light that inspired everybody else goes out. And all those little lights, there's nobody to rally around. Countries tend to mimic their largest and most powerful neighbor. So if they don't have all of their most powerful neighbors are authoritarian, there's very little investment in being a democratic state. And in fact, those countries might not like that you're democratic because you won't work for their interests. We've seen this in America, right? Where the American government has overthrown democratically supported governments because it didn't benefit our companies. And imagine if America was even less democratic than it was during the Cold War, right? If we truly didn't care anymore. And in many ways we don't, right? You've seen this with Palestine, where America and with Mexico, which is another thing. Which I'm not going to get into what the specifics, but essentially the U.S. has been under Biden attempting to impose pesticides onto Mexican corn, um, Monsanto pesticides. Sorry, specifically Roundup. The one that causes cancer. The U.S. refuses to, due to industry capture, U.S. regulatory bodies, which are severely declined over the past decade or so. You hear now, when you hear about major regulatory changes that make a big positive change in our products, it's always the EU nowadays. It used to be the US, but industry capture which is basically that companies now have created this sort of cycle where they'll hire people out of regulatory agencies, and members of companies apply and become employees at the agency. So there's like a revolving door, and then you mix in lobbyists and politicians and donations and all of that, and you create this very nice, efficient, ultra corrupt cycle. But essentially, American regulatory agencies refuse to acknowledge the problems of Roundup, and the government and Biden is trying to force the Mexicans to use it, uh, effectively forcing the Mexicans to get cancer, especially since Mexicans eat a lot more corn than we do, meaning they would be much more exposed to the pesticide. Like, we eat a lot of corn, but they eat even more than we do. And so it would expose them much more. So America is increasingly had this brief period after the Cold War where we thought, well, let's actually try to live up to our stated goals of being for democracy, because we obviously didn't in the Cold War. We want to believe in things like democracy and human rights and rule of law. And then, the past, 8 or so years happened, 12 or so, and it never really happened. And we've kind of gone, and we're seeing, a very sharp return to the transactional politics of old. Now, imagine if that was accelerated by an authoritarian leader who saw everything as transactional for his own personal benefit. And how much worse that would be for our neighbors. And if our neighbors would rapidly no longer see the need to be democracies, because the people in power could seize it, erode their democracies, and then, as long as the US benefits from their regime in some way, they can have infinite power, money, and live up the luxury, right? So I guess we can then say that having other countries have democracies that are thriving, especially other big, powerful countries, but not just that, keeps the light on for democracy, right? It keeps the dream of democracy and the idea that it's good for people to have a say in their government, that the right to rule comes from the people. Having that light kept on is really important. And having countries that remain democracies, the more countries that remain democracies and are still fighting for their democracies after the US goes, the better chance that democracy can return, because it will still exist and people will still have an example to look to, right? One of the reasons why democracy became so big in the first place is because the US was this big superpower that won 2 world wars, right? Obvious, and it's also why communism, Soviet style communism, was so popular, is because the Soviets won the World War II with the US. The Soviets in the US were the ones who won World War II. So it was their political systems that were the ones that became the dominant ones. Political systems, unlike the old hegemons of old, the old imperial hegemons of old who'd lost the wars. Even if France and England ended up being on the right side, they still lost the war, right? They were devastated. And so that idea, the ideology of imperialism and authoritarianism, of the old of and authoritarianism where power is derived from divine right and blood, were ideas that after the first two after World War One and World War Two, died out. It was an idea that started to die out. It's not dead, and it could still come back, but that was how it was. And so seeing the growth, and so keeping the light on is very important to have those examples, because those changes happened really fast. Every country fell into one of the camps very quickly. And if the only camp becomes, right-wing authoritarian government, then everyone's going to be like that. So having liberal democracies keep the lights on is important for us to remember that liberal democracy exists in 50 years. So that said, I guess we can go over some of the elections. There was a presidential election in Lithuania. It was same people. The incumbent president, who's a conservative, won. I don't like him, but whatever. It's not a huge deal. The bigger election in Lithuania is going to happen at the end of the year anyway. We'll probably discuss that when we come to it. We obviously saw the UK. We already talked about that. So let's go to the big one. I guess let's start with South Africa. The big three. South Africa is a country that is a bit of a mess. I think I can say that. They have been struggling with deep corruption. The African National Congress, the party of oh God, how did I just blank on Nelson Mandela's name? Of the party of Nelson Mandela, obviously the party that fought against apartheid, and up until now, I guess spoilers, you can see they no longer have a majority. This is the first time they have ever lost their majority. The ANC has kind of become dominated. The ANC was very quickly dominated by corruption after Nelson Mandela went out of office, and it has very quickly entrenched itself as a corrupt entity. Which obviously strongly tarnishes its legacy. It has used its unprecedented domination and power, right, for decades, to just entrench power and corruption. And it's made South Africa, and after the big boom after the end of apartheid, there's hope in the air. Millions of people are now full citizens of the country and contribute and have lives and have a better quality of living. And that has slowly eroded away as everybody is now worse off because of corruption. But the problem South Africa is facing, so in that regard, right, South Africa losing the African National Congress losing its majority is a good thing, right? They needed to get, taken down a peg and removed from absolute power, which will, give breathing room to anti-corruption authorities to actually investigate corruption within the party. The problem is that every other party also mostly kind of sucks. Most of these parties have a similar position. They are all old. It's a lot of old faces, right? There's not a lot of new voices in South African politics. There was no new voices in South African politics. It's all old people. It's all the same old faces and new coats of paint. The Democratic Alliance is a white party. It's, well, majority white party. It's not like pro-apartheid. It's the led by anti-apartheid whites, but it tends to be a little more conservative, wants everything to be non-racial, doesn't like the idea of reparations, sort of thing. They're edging on the, so they're not exactly popular, which is why they didn't really grow in their seats, because they're kind of limited to the white minority. And not that there's no black and colored people, colored being people of a mixed background, and other minorities that vote for them. They certainly do, but they have a ceiling in many ways. And also, but they have for many, many years called the ANC on their crap. So that's good. But, as part of this election, they were hoping to create an anti-ANC union with not these two parties, but everyone else. Everyone else, of course, including a conservative Zulu party, which, okay. A right-wing conservative Zulu party. All right, sure. It's an ethno-nationalist party, not ultra ethno-nationalist, I don't believe. But it's just a, traditional right-wing conservative Zulu party, as well as the Patriotic Alliance, as said, formed by convicted criminals. And of course the Freedom Front Plus, which is the Boers, who are the Dutch inhabitants. If the word Volksstaat sounds bad, then you should understand that it is bad. It is exactly as bad as it sounds. It is a state that believe it's the belief that the Boers, the descendants of the Dutch, should have a white state in South Africa just for them. Wow, that's nice. That's definitely not an ultra white supremacist party or anything. So they were willing to work with them, which says a lot about the Democratic Alliance. But of course, then you have these two parties that I haven't mentioned yet. And I'm going to fuck this pronunciation up, but Umkhonto Sizwe. I tried. This is a Zulu nationalist party, headed by Jacob Zuma, a former member of the ANC. He is probably the most corrupt member of the ANC. I believe he had rape charges against him. He's a bad guy. Let's just be clear. Jacob Zuma is a really fucking bad guy. And so, of course, his party, his new party, basically centered around returning him to power. Obviously gained big, did about as well as they were polling, 14%. So they're not good. And they're pretty bad, right? That's obviously not good. Jacob Zuma, of course, after coming in third place in the election, said that he was contesting the election results and believed that they're not real and that the election must be redone, or he and his party will enact radical violence on the country, because he did not get a 2/3 majority in parliament, which he believed he deserved. Yeah, so these guys are bad. And the ANC, to its credit, and I will give the ANC credit here, conceded its loss. It did not, obviously, they're still the biggest party, so they'll probably be able to form a new government, but they will have to coalition for the first time. and they accepted their defeat. They said, we've got to learn from our mistakes, and we accept our defeat. So, credit to the ANC. The ANC does still believe, for its corruption problems, it does still believe in democracy. Um, whereas Zuma does not. Speaking of not believing in democracy, the Economic Freedom Fighters are a very interesting party. They are a radical left party, but not in the way you might think if you think of America. If you think of maybe very online American leftists, they are a male dominated leftist party. They are violent, anti-democratic. They're very pro Russia, pro China. So what we would call in the US tanky. These are the sorts of people who don't really believe in democracy. There's also been a lot of there's also just obviously criticisms, particularly they who cares about but cult of personality stuff, you know it's women have criticized the party that it's doesn't really have, you know obviously this is Wikipedia, how much of this is actually true, but they've got a bit of a history attached to them. um and they have made a lot of states in support of Russia, in support of China, which does not engender them to be particularly pro-democratic. They do espouse pro-LGBT rights, so at the very least they're not like Russia on that. But how much is just talk, right? So they're a bit of a wild card. They want to nationalize everything, which obviously scares the markets. Not that I give a shit about that, but they're definitely a wild card. And I know a lot of people like to look, oh, I'm a leftist, so I like the leftist party. But from what I've read about them, they're not exactly trustworthy on that front. They don't sound like they're looking to, maybe forward the goals. So obviously, this is going to be a very difficult transition for South Africa. Um, and I would definitely say South Africa is entering murky waters. I would say it's good overall that the ANC lost their majority. I think it's deserved. I also think it is a very scary time, and I hope that new forces will come up. New forces will enter the political sphere instead of the same old actors. Um, right now, there's a lot of talks about who the coalition partner is going to be. The big candidates are obviously going to be a duo with these two, with the ANC, or the ANC and the Democratic Alliance in a national unity party. Obviously, this option would be bad because of the threats from Zuma. Um, like, whatever with the economic freedom fighters, but Zuma has these guys aren't great, but Zuma has explicitly said that if he's not included, that's another thing he said, is that he's also threatening violence if he's not in the government. So he clearly doesn't believe in democracy, is clearly only out for himself, and should not be allowed in power, right? So probably this is the best unity between these two parties. Also, a unity between these two parties probably gives a lot of breathing room because they'll be fighting each other the whole time. Gives a lot of breathing room for anti-corruption authorities, but also for new political forces maybe to start. There's a lot of little parties here, and maybe some new forces might come out in South Africa. But in terms of whether I would rank this as a positive for democracy, I guess I would say yes. But it is not like a big banner year for democracy in South Africa, but it is a step in the right direction. Let's check back in on our primary. These are all things we should already know. Well, see how many. A lot of uncommitted in New Jersey. So less than that, you'd like to see over 10%, but it is good that there's a strong protest vote. Should be a good warning. To Biden about the failures of his policies, how they're hurting America and innocent children, which is not nice. Looks like well, we can check. The guy who updates this is a guy. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He goes by Daniel online. It looks like he hasn't seen any updates yet. So we'll go back to the next election. And this one's a little bit of a happier one. Mexico. The Mexican election just happened. And it was a fucking blowout. The current ruling leftist party demolished. This is actually the Mexican. So if you see like things like taking some time to translate, this is actually the Mexican election board's website, which is awesome. I love when countries have this. This is a really nice one where they have like all this extra data. You have like citizen participation. Urban versus rural votes. It's great. I love when countries have an election. I wish the U.S. had something like this. This is a great website for just like looking at the results as they come in. Scheinbaum, Jewish descent. I don't think she's practicing Judaism at all, but she is of Jewish descent. Leftist. I'm hoping she will take a bit more of a tact away from AMLO's the current president of Mexico's. He's a leftist, but he's also a bit more of an egomaniac kind of guy, right? He's very populist. He also went out of his way to protect oil interests in the country, which is not great. But he's generally very much like he wants to be like seen as a certain way. And I'm hoping that she's got a bit of a technocratic background as well as an activist background. So I'm hoping she can kind of blend that into a really effective progressive government rather than the more bombastic AMLO style of doing things just to sound like a leftist, right? The big note here, she was Xochitl Galvez was of course the main. Galvez was the main. Would it be Galvez? I think it's Galvez. Was the main opposition party candidate. She is associated with the PRI. She is from the PAN party. Well, she's not from the PAN party, but the PAN party chose her. And her coalition is the PRI party and the PRD party, which is a slightly more leftist version of the PRI. The PRI is the former dictatorship of Mexico. So this is bad. She initially sounded like good, but the more people learned about her, the less popular she got. And turns out everyone was right to think she's a piece of garbage, because immediately after it looked like she was losing the election, she started tweeting out things about election fraud. And there is no evidence of election fraud in Mexico. You see the news talk about, we should actually talk about the news a little bit and how the news portrays, the American news portrays these elections, because we're going to be talking about that a lot for the third of the big three that we're going to be talking about. American news, when they describe the Mexican election results, despite violence, they talk about Mexico as this violent country, criminals everywhere. In a way they wouldn't talk about if the country was run by a conservative, almost certainly. It's very clear. Yes, Mexico definitely has problems with the cartels. That is not up for debate. and the cartels have gotten worse. There is a lot of problems, but the country is not like riven by violence and unstable mess. Mexico is a pretty developed country. Let's be clear. Yes, they have a mafia problem, but so does South Africa, right? Um, I'd argue South Africa's problems are actually worse. It's essentially, in many ways, a mafia state. Um, you know, organized crime and corruption are just rampant. Mexico is actually doing somewhat well, like overall. Obviously, the cartels were a huge problem, but and getting worse as they get more bold. The cartels do assassinate politicians. That is a real thing that happens semi regularly. But a lot of the people they're assassinating are from these parties. So maybe they don't like you know. But either way, that is a problem she'll have to deal with. But it's going to be a pretty dominant. One of the things I don't think we've seen is the seats for the for the I don't remember what it's called, like the Congress of Deputies or whatever their lower house is, and their upper house as well. I'm interested to see the how these turn out. I believe they have the semi vote system, where part of them are assigned by district, like in the U.S. Where you run for a seat and you won it. Yeah. So here, single member constituency votes. This is all elections in the U.S. are single member constituency votes. So this is we use first past the vote post, which they use as well. Right, where you go into a district, you run in a district, you run for that district. Proportional representation but they also use proportional representation. So basically, this means that you can basically party will create a list of candidates to be on their proportional representation list. Some countries do only proportional representation, and people will vote for a party. And the parties, and basically the number of votes a party gets total is then turned into a proportion, and then you get a certain number of those seats. So if party A gets 10% of the vote, they'll get 10% of the seats. Usually there's also a threshold for this, so you have to have over 5%. 5% is the usual number for most countries. But you have to have 5%. If you have over 5%, you get proportional representation seats. I don't know. I don't know exactly what Mexico's is, but that's generally how it's done with proportional representation. What's nice about proportional now, so the criticism, of course, of proportional representation is that, well, you're not going to necessarily get people who represent your area, right? If you elect somebody in your constituency, they're usually from your constituency. So like they'll know about local problems and bring a local voice to the government, whether it's a state government or a federal government or whatever. But proportional representation is nice because it allows smaller parties that maybe can't win to get representation. So you'll see a lot of, and this is why I'm very interested in the final results here, is because of the third candidate we've seen here, Jorge Alvarez Maynez. And Jorge and Maynez, I don't know what to call him. I'll just call him Maynez. Maynez is interesting because he is a center-left party. He's from a center-left party. This is not like a far-right crazy. These are center-left party, progressive. They obviously don't always agree entirely with the leftists, but they are generally center-left. I think they're maybe a little more economically liberal than Morena, which is the big party here. She's Morena, so this is the big Morena group. This is the Pan PRI group, and then the movement. I don't know how to pronounce that word. Let's see. The Citizens Movement. We'll say it in English. So he was notable for the reason he got so many votes as a third party candidate was because he performed very well in debates. Galvez's camp offered to add his party to their coalition, and he refused because he doesn't agree with them. They're very conservative. He doesn't agree with that, but also he didn't like how they were potentially sowing the seeds of doubt on the election. And that was, of course, totally borne out. He ran a very fair, clean, above board campaign. There was the scandal related to him was at one of his campaign events, there was like a gust of wind and like a storm or something, and like a tent was blown over and killed a bunch of people, and injured a lot of people. It was very, a horrific event. Um, I believe Shine Bomb like canceled her campaign events in solidarity. It was not his fault, right? It was just like a terrible thing happened at one of his campaign events. Um, but after the election, he immediately called Galvez out on her election denial, and her fans hate his guts. So I'm glad I like he ran a fair, straightforward campaign. It'll be nice to have a voice. I never like there's actually a good shot that Morena gets a super majority, which means that maybe they can pass some good changes. But also it means that maybe it'll be nice to have other voices, and maybe it'll also be nice to have an opposition party that doesn't include a coalition with the former dictatorship party. That would be nice, right? So it would be maybe a fair, good, fostering part of democracy isn't just the party you want to win winning, but also having an opposition that is fair and respectful and represents also a pro-democratic outlook, and who the country, because it kind of sucks ass to live in a world where every election is an existential crisis for the state of democracy. So I would definitely say Mexico's election is a big win for democracy. I would like to see the final results, before penciling that in, and I just am hoping that they get a lot of proportional rep seats. It looks like they got 10% of the vote, so that would be really nice if they get some nice proportional rep seats. And see, this is the 300, right, of the constituency seats. So the Pan PRI coalition won 40 of those seats, and they won 219. I don't know why there's a separate group of Morenas here and separate group of Pans. Like, I can see them on the map. I wonder if these are seats that are not part of the coalition or something. Like maybe they're like, we're part of the same party, but we don't agree with the coalition. I am curious about that. I mean, we can look at the Chamber of Deputies election. I mean, it looks like they're all part of the government, right? But it will be the coalition, not Morena alone, gaining a supermajority, which is at least good. So, they have to work with their coalition. And we're going to be talking about coalitions in a second and why that's good that it's a coalition government and not a single party. Yeah. So overall, pretty good news. We don't obviously know the full citizens movement gains potentially. I'd like to see some big gains for them. I wish them well as a fair and good opposition movement, and potentially offering maybe some of these voters a better opposition party to vote for, and for disaffect, and also importantly for if people decide, hey, we're not liking the Morena group, we want to vote for somebody else, maybe they vote for these guys instead of voting for these guys. So that's Mexico. Let's head back to our primary. So overall, good news out of Mexico. Definitely brings a smile to my face. Let's take a look at our. Let's reload this. See if there's. Also, I'll check another tab. Doesn't look like there's any updates from the election, any big wins or losses that are unsurprising. I guess we can take a look at maybe where popular. I mean, we know the results of some of these, right? So it's like, I guess the Montana 2nd District primary. Let's see. Let's take a look at something. Yeah, so this is probably a Republican win for this seat. So let's take a look. This is not the one I. No, it is. Oh, okay, that's just the only place where we have results, I think. Yeah, 2% of votes in. So we don't really have any results here. You can take a look at what they've got as an analysis here. Oh, well, there's a lot more votes. Hello. Just as we're looking. Looks like Downing seems to be in the lead. He is a auditor. So looks like he's in last place, the guy trying to make a comeback. I don't see Elsie. Oh, there she is. A lot of people gunning for this seat. Um, I mean, it's always, you can try to compare, right? Like how many votes they get, but you can say, well, look, Tester's got 36 and Sheehy's got 34, so doesn't really tell you a lot, right? Well, the Republicans have 45,000 votes and the Democrats have 37,000 votes. So obviously the Republicans are going to win. But everybody knew who the Democratic incumbent was, so maybe people didn't come out to vote, right? So it doesn't really tell you much. Not any updates from here, so I guess we will move on to the third and final country of the night. The big boy, the biggest of boys, the biggest country of them all, India. Yes, India is the big shock, and the biggest shock to American political pundits. I don't think there's going to be any. Yeah, because they're all shocked too. But before, I wish I gotten some screenshots, but before all of the American news were like, big landslide for Modi, woohoo! Modi is the best. He's going to get a big landslide. We love Modi. He helped with the economy. Modi, of course, famous president of India, probably one of the presidents you've definitely, if you've heard of any international presidents, you've probably heard of Narendra Modi, the president. No, he's the prime minister of India. He has been famous for increasing India's economic output, being encouraging a lot of foreign investment. This is he's overseen a lot of the transition. He's been president. He's running for his third president, prime minister for 2 terms. He's running for his 3rd term right now, which is there's only been which he would be the 2nd Indian prime minister in history to have a 3rd term, and he likely is going to get his 3rd term. and and the American media loves him. He is a darling of the U.S. media, which is part of why they are so shocked and appalled at the result. The other thing Modi is known for is being a violent Hindu nationalist who has all but explicitly endorsed the genocide of certain minorities, particularly the Muslim minority in India, and is a brutal dictator and has rapidly eroded India's democratic government and destroyed civil society. You know, he's definitely a really bad guy. So, of course, the American media loves him. And, who cares about if a few Muslims die, right? Yeah, for example, his last big campaign stunt was there was a mosque that was built near a Hindu site. It was near a religious Hindu site in the 1800s. I believe it was built in the 1800s. It was built a while ago. And the mosque was a big contentious issue. And in the 90s, a bunch of Hindu nationalists decided to settle the issue of the mosque, settle the debate of the mosque. And what they did was they demolished it themselves and instigated riots which killed thousands of people. It's generally regarded as a pretty bad thing. So how does Modi, knowing this happened, how does Modi use this for a campaign in 2024? Well, he opened up a Hindu temple on the site of the mosque, which, I mean, if you know anything, tells you a lot, right? Tells you a lot about who he is and what kind of guy Narendra Modi is. So everyone expected him, of course, to win a resounding third term. But he had some problems. There were some signs of some issues where he wanted to expand. The two big places he really wanted to expand were Uttar Pradesh, which is this region here. It's where New Delhi is. It is I believe it's where New Delhi is. Let's actually Google this before I'm not spreading misinformation. It is I know it's the most populous and most cosmopolitan state of India. But I don't remember. Nope, Lucknow, not New Delhi. Okay. So I was incorrect. I was spreading misinformation. So either way, it is the most populous region, and of course, he wanted to win. Obviously, as you can see, he did not. BJP is Modi's party. It is a Hindu nationalist party, violent and authoritarian. It does, however, have coalition partners, some of whom are not that way. But he also wanted to expand in the south. The south is the Tamil territories. Now, I'm not an expert on Indian politics. India is the largest country on the planet. It is the most diverse country on the planet. I would compare it to like the EU, where it's like got a lot of different cultures, and it's very hard to explain it as one thing. But like that's like not even a good enough comparison because it's like 500 times more diverse than the EU. So basically, the Tamils live in the south here, and the Tamil peoples have historically had separate polities from northern India. Northern India generally had empires. Southern Italy had its empires and city-states and states and all of that. And then the middle was kind of a chaos zone. That's basically Indian history. The Tamils, of course, being right in the middle of the Indian Ocean in a big sticking out point, had a lot of trade. So the Tamils generally had this very cosmopolitan culture, just because of years, centuries of trading and being kind of the center. Most Tamils are Hindu, but they also worship Tamil specific gods. So the Tamils don't worship the same Hinduism as Modi, right? So he struggled to expand into the Tamil territories. Um, he did make some gains in the Tamil territories, and we'll get into that as part of his strategy later. I guess we can get into it now. He did make some gains because there are Christian Tamils, and he appealed to the Christian Tamils by focusing. Which you think like, well, that's crazy. How would he get Christians to like him if he only wants if he wants to turn India into a Hindu state? You know, the most religiously diverse country on the planet into a Hindu state. Well, he basically said, well, we have a common enemy in the Muslims. So let's kill the Muslims together, right? We both agree on that. And the Christians agreed in a large and allowed him to make some gains. But in the very southern Tamil states, he did not. The Greys are going to be other parties that are not part of the coalitions. Now, his opposition is very fractured. We should pull up India. I don't know why I didn't pull that up earlier, but do I have? Okay. Results. So you can see he has a huge party, and then there's the others, right? So these are the seats won. Ignore this column. This is seats contested, which is interesting for some people, but not right. They're not important, right? So these are the actual seat results. So obviously, so the India, so the opposition for this election decided to come together, and they created the India Coalition, the Indian National Developmental Inclusive Alliance, specifically to have the acronym India. Of course, after this, Modi tried to change the name of the country to Bharat, which is a historic name for a used for a Hindu state in India, exclusively Hindu state. So not great. So this is, of course, a very diverse. You can see communists, you can see conservatives here, you can see everybody. Basically, anybody who doesn't agree with Modi's idea of a Hindu state. Although, to be clear, these two parties are a little more flexible, and we're going to get to why that's important in a second. But the point is the India Alliance, led by the Indian National Congress, which is the Gandhi's party. The Indian National Congress ruled for decades. The Indian National Congress is actually very similar. We brought up to the ANC, which we talked about earlier. They were the party that led the revolution against the British, the fight against the British. They led the way for independence, but of course they were in power for a very long time and became very, very corrupt. However, they have lost power. They have been out of power for quite some time. And now the Indian National Congress is still pretty small. It's much smaller than it used to be. I mean, you can see they did not win very. They're barely bigger. The ratio between them and some of their larger allies is not as big as it is for the BJP, but they are basically leading the fight to save India's democracy. India has lost its rating as a democracy. It's considered an electoral autocracy by VDEM. And VDEM, I mean, I have my issues with their methodology. They're they basically do it every year. They do a bunch of research and classify countries. I personally think they're way too forgiving to a lot of democracies, and allow democracies like Japan to get called liberal democracies when there's a lot of evidence that would suggest that is not the case. But so when I say VDEM has reclassified them as an electoral autocracy, I consider VDEM to be too conservative. So that means they're probably a lot worse. It means things pretty bad. So India contested this election, hoping, but the polls said it would be a big Modi victory. The news was cheering on, American media was cheering on Modi. And then the election results came out. This is found out basically today. And Modi did not do well. And in fact, he did so not well is that while he will still likely be the prime minister, he cannot do so alone. And this is critical. And this is where we get to these two parties. Because the BJP got 240 seats. To have a majority in the Indian parliament, you need to have 270. That means, while yes, he does have enough seats with his coalition, it means that there's now a check on his power. Before this, these parties only joined, obviously some of these are, we want to have a Hindu, there's Hinduist Nationalist Congress Party, right? I don't know what this party stands for, but I imagine. Oh, they're secular. I don't know, but whatever. And those descriptions are always like a Russian roulette of quality. But my point is these parties joined up with him on the assumption, all of these parties joined up with Modi on the assumption that they would be the in-groups under Modi's potential. There were predictions and, in fact, cheers for a supermajority of just the BJP without their allies. So any party that joined up with him was going to be on the inside of the supermajority, meaning they were going to be on his good side. Now, of course, there's much less incentive because any one of these parties leading, particularly the two bigger ones, which are, I believe, both known to flip-flop. These two parties have flip-flopped back and forth a few times. So if these parties aren't happy with the BJP at any time, they can flip to the India coalition and Modi loses his government. And that is huge, right? Like, that is a big deal. Modi no longer has an absolute majority, and this severely weakens the amount of power that he has because now he has to work with his coalition partners, who previously he didn't really think he had to work with, right? These were ultimately just hangers on, but now he needs them, which means that they can be a massive restraint on his more extreme policies. So a lot of Indians are celebrating today because this is essentially putting a big stop to it's not a decisive victory by any means, but it is a stopgap. It does move them in the right direction. It gives them a window of a chance to escape autocracy and hate that have the autocratic drift and hatred that have defined Modi's reign. And remember, we talked about earlier that he's well known for his economic improvements, and maybe people want to sacrifice that. His economic improvements have been pretty unevenly distributed. The poor have not really seen, there's still a massive amount of economic inequality. And a lot of that is due to the caste system, which, of course, as a devout Hindu nationalist, Modi enforces. And the caste system means that people in lower caste, basically castes are hereditary groups in Hindu culture that are assigned to certain jobs. Lower castes are essentially worth less people, are people who are worth less than people in high castes. And so while people in higher castes have done better, people in the undesirable castes have not done so well. And so his economic growth has not exactly been even. His economic growth has not exactly been for everybody. And so that is another one of the pitches of India, right? Is that India should be for everybody. And like, look, if this party came to power, it would be a mess. I mean, you see revolutionary socialists, and there's like 10 different socialist parties in here, communist parties in here. And if you know anything about communists and socialists, is that they all fucking hate each other. Why do you think they have like 10 different parties? You know, there's a Bollywood set designers party here. This is a Tamil party, a Tamil nationalist party. Looks like a leftist Tamil nationalist party. Um, a tribal interest party. What else? Let's take a look at this. A conservative anti-communist party. You know, working in the same group, literally right next to the Communist Party in the list, right? You know, that tells you just how diverse this coalition is. But the point is that India isn't just for the high caste Hindus who believe in Hinduism in a certain way, it's for all of the diverse peoples of India. And this election sent a resounding message to that effect, which is great and good. And it definitely makes me happy. At least, you know, if I can't be happy in my own personal life, I can be happy that India and Mexico and kind of South Africa have taken a step in the right direction, which is really good. So there is good news in the world. There's of course other elections coming up, a bunch. The European Union, of course, has its big election coming up in a few days. There's a bunch of other ones. The EU also, a bunch of EU countries also will have elections on the same day as the EU elections, so that'll be interesting to see those results. But yeah, so that's the international elections analysis. While we wait for some updates, it doesn't look like we're gonna really get any. Go and look on some social media websites and see if there's any big updates on any of the primary results. Oh, he doesn't have any. What about? Oh, doesn't look like there's been any results that matter enough for people to talk about them. Bolts doesn't have any updates. When Bolts gets updates, they're a little slow about it, but they'll put like the result of the election over here. So they'll like this will like get squished a little more, and there'll be a result. No like examples here, but I guess let's take a look at the House races. Iowa 3 Dem primary. Uh, 3. So we're looking at 3. Bakam 1. Who is Bakam? Landon Bakan, who worked under Vilsat, and Oh wow, that's actually a really impressive resume. Unfortunately, she looks like she lost pretty badly. Um, Montana 2 we already took a look at, but I believe we'll probably have a result. Getting in results as we looked. I guess we can look at the governor while we're here. Did he? I assume the governor won, right? Okay. So that's like the guy who was going to win anyway. Montana 2. Let's see. Still no result. Oh, this is actually very close. Both of these are very close. Obviously, the Dem doesn't really matter, but Driscoll looks to be holding the lead. No, wait, that's the Democrat. Downing seems to be holding the lead pretty comfortably, too. My nose is very itchy. That's why I keep pausing. By the way, it's very scratchy on my nose. I don't know why. Um, yeah. Interesting. I don't know whether he's like on the far right, the right, the far right, or the ultra far right. You know, not that there's much of a difference ultimate in effect, but I guess it'll decide how funny the House of Representative is when the Republicans win it. Conaway did win. We saw that. Menendez did win. Um, Any of these others that we like care about. 5 of opponents. All right, let me move this out and we'll look and see if we can get any New Mexico results. For the state legislator. State house, sorry. Okay. We want to start with HD9. The incumbent did hold on here. So the thing here why we're looking at these incumbents is 11 House Democrats stopped a bill in New Mexico that would have provided paid family leave and medical leave. And those 11 Democrats that stopped that are facing challengers from their left to again who want to make sure that that bill passes this time the next time it comes up. Obviously, this guy is doing just fine. I guess they don't like paid family leave, no matter how popular it is. 27 looks like it was a much closer contest. Obviously, it's still not called, but I'd rather be Matthews right now. I'd rather be the incumbent right now. The star means they're in the incumbent. 53. Well, there is one going to get upset. One is going to be knocked out. And this is something we've seen a lot in the primaries across all the primaries is that like pretty mixed results. Like progressives have made pushes, right? So like there's been fights between progressives and conservative Democrats. And you've seen sometimes and it's gone both ways, right? The conservatives will attack a progressive, the progressives will attack a conservative, right? Um and the results have generally been pretty mixed. Like conservative attacks on progressives have largely bounced off for the most part. So, like progressive incumbents have generally been able to keep their seats, but progressive attacks have had pretty mixed successes. So I would think probably overall trending progressive, but slowly. 53, we just checked. 69, nice. Uh oh wow, yeah. That one's definitely going that way. As in 70. So three of these are going to be progressive. Right? See, it's mixed. The first two looks pretty comfortable for the incumbents, the centrist incumbents, and three look good for the progressive challengers. Mixed bag. And I think that's generally what we've seen is a mixed bag. And all of this because the Democratic Party really wants to split into two different parties, but it can't because of the existential threat of what's going on over here. But the Democrats will probably never get to that point because they're too afraid to have any messaging to do the right thing, you know. Um, I guess yeah, uncontested in South Dakota. It's always interesting to see it is interesting to see the totals and the votes, you know, uncommitted doing very well in Mexico. But obviously there's generally you'd expect, right? Like there's more Democrats in New Mexico than Republicans. It's a more liberal state, so maybe there's going to be more protest votes. And it's not like Trump really has a chance in New Mexico anyway, right? So it's very you can't read too much out of these. It is interesting to see them, but I guess we can look at the city council races. So let's take a look on over here because we saw those earlier. The DC city councils, Ward 4 and at large. So Robert White is a progressive running against a conservative challenger, and looks like he came off. Oh my God, his name is Robert White, and his challenger is Red Grant. They both are color people. That's so funny. Well, White came out pretty comfortably, and Ward 4, Janice Lewis George faces challenges denouncing her support for local criminal justice reforms that were overturned by Congress, because Congress sucks and DC should be a state. And George looks like she prevailed pretty comfortably. Um, Montana's got a ballot measure that's interesting. Audit their local government structures. This sounds interesting. In a city in Bozeman, they want to review their city government to try and allow the government to be more kind to renters, which is interesting. I wish we could do government. I wish government audits were a thing that we could do at every level, dude. I wonder if there's any results. New York Times often doesn't cover everything because they don't care. Yeah, we're not going to see results for that. Um, maybe we'll see the South Dakota ones. I'm not even going to talk about them unless we can see them. No. Um, New Mexico. Oh, a DA, prosecutor. Oh, so she was. Yeah, so these are both very similar. I guess it's interesting to see if the incumbent won. This doesn't really matter. This is the karmic always. She's the incumbent. Looks like she's going to win. Whatever. New Jersey, Passaic County Sheriff. Sheriff elections are very important. Sheriffs can choose to work with ICE and deport well, not necessarily criminals, just illegals. So basically, what they'll do is they'll illegal immigrants like if you're an illegal immigrant working, they'll just like pull you and you look like a little maybe a little too Latino. They'll pull you over and then you can just be sent to immigration authorities on suspicion of a crime, even if you didn't commit any crimes. You're, a citizen. You're not a citizen. Maybe your family is a citizen. You have family, and you're just a hardworking, normal person, right? They also have a lot of power over how laws are enforced, the accountability of officers. Uh, Local Democrats, former Sheriff Jeremy. I don't know. Busy Alley. I mean, this is his opponents say about him. It doesn't really say anything about the differences, just that they hate each other. So I guess let's see who won. Not that apparently it like matters because we don't know what their stances are, but oh, we can't because New York Times doesn't have it. Nice. Because it's too local. It's a Passaic County. Who cares about Passaic County? Yeah, so I think that's basically it. We've seen a bunch of these. Nothing too interesting. I'm gonna take one more look at the people I follow who generally have a good line on this sort of stuff. And it looks like nothing much. I guess what I'll say is the conclusions are that despite the positive changes in New Jersey, looks like the anti-incumbent fervor only really the anti state party fervor only really happened at the top of the ticket with Andy Kim rather than and most of the lower challengers uh, didn't really make any leeway against the party chosen candidates. Um, yeah. So I don't know. This isn't a particularly interesting election to watch, so I'm not going to bore you guys anymore. But yeah, I hope the at least the talk about why democracy is important and about some of the international elections that have been going on was interesting. And of course, Stream Elements wants to just pop up on my center monitor for some reason. Um, but yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this little talk, this podcast, Reno. Um, I'm hoping that things get better and maybe I do more of these as I feel better. But so far, all signs point to bad things happening and more bad things. So, we'll see. I don't know if the next one will be political. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I did mention the discussion of we did briefly go over the discussion of proportional versus constituent representation, and that there's definitely a topic I want to do at some point about third parties in the U.S., why they don't work and why they could, and how they could rather. I think that would be a really interesting discussion about potential reforms to the American democratic system, but also just the way it would work even within the current system. Um, in terms of non-politics stuff, I could do some more clickbaity stuff like, ranking animes that I like. I could talk about Elden Ring after the DLC comes out. I'm very excited for that. I don't have the money for it, but I might just not care and be like, well, I'm gonna be miserable anyway. I might as well make myself happy, you know. If I do manage to afford the Elden Ring DLC, that will almost certainly be a return of Chill Elden Ring to Study and Relax 2 series. Um, I don't know if I will stream that on YouTube or Twitch. Probably Twitch. But yeah, I mean, if you're interested in that, I guess follow me on Twitch. I don't really stream that often. I'm hoping to more, but eventually. Other topics. Maybe I'll do something for Warlords 3, the current tournament going on in the Age of Empires scene, and I can go over like why I like Age of Empires esports. But yeah, I definitely want to try to do a non-political one next. But we'll see. There could be a huge development in Ukraine that I really want to talk about or something. Who knows? But yeah, hope you all enjoyed the episode. I say that again because I don't know how to end things, and I hope things go better for me in the interim. I don't think they will, but you never know. And yeah, bye.